Hello, my name is Wade Frazier. This is January 5th, 2026, 3:04 p.m. This video is going to be a discussion of a topic that, boy, this has been a long-standing one with me. In fact, my ex-colleague Brian O'Leary, the astronaut and free energy visionary, he really, this is a topic that he wrote about quite a bit, which was, well, could traditional alternative energy really solve humanity's biggest problems? Is that possible? Is that feasible? And Brian didn't think so. He didn't. In fact, he wrote a clever little essay. It's called None of the Above. And so he surveyed all the conventional alternative energy technologies, and he was like, none of these are going to get it done, which was another reason why he was an advocate for free energy technology, or as Brian called it, new energy technology. I use free. That's my background. New. Some people use new. That's fine. I use free though. So in Brian's final book, he surveyed all of them and came up with none of them. They're all too little and too late to really forestall the looming catastrophe that humanity is on the brink of. And the two that he discussed the most are the ones that are get the most publicity today, which is solar, usually photovoltaic, and wind energy. And when Brian wrote about these in 2009, the last time he wrote about in 2009, photovoltaic, solar, and wind provided about 1/3 of 1% of global energy use. So it was infinitesimal. Didn't even, not even, provide almost nothing. Today, actually, they provide about 6% of global energy production, less than 3% in the United States. So it's a lot of progress. I mean, 20 times as much in 2025 as it was in 2009. It's still 6%, so it's a long ways to go. Fossil fuels are still 80% plus. That really hasn't changed hardly at all. But there's that progress. And then when I made a bunch of posts recently on Noam Chomsky's work, and in his work, he mentioned the new Green Deal and how easily humanity could solve the energy issue with that. And I decided to poke into that a bit more. I poked around here and there. I've never seen definitive treatments on these issues. There's a lot of controversy, a lot of experts going back and forth. Yes, it can. No, it can't. And so in the post, my Substack post, it's the basis for this. I linked to a lot of these studies, all of these discussions. And anyway, there's a lot of experts who think it can, windmills and solar panels can power the world. And so I'll get into some of that in this post. I've seen estimates, if I link to it. One estimate I saw was $35 trillion globally by 2030 to meet the 2050 goals. So that global temperatures only increased by 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit, which is catastrophic. It will be catastrophic for humanity. I linked to some of this. So we had the medieval warm period, which was about 800 AD to about 1200 AD, called the medieval warm period, or the High Middle Ages, as it was known in Europe. And then it was followed by what's called the Little Ice Age. The difference between the medieval warm period and the Little Ice Age globally was about 1 degree Fahrenheit. So 3 times that much. Just, yeah. I don't want to live to see that. So yeah, it's going to create great havoc with the world. And as I have written before, I don't talk about it much here in this post, but the biggest risk I see to rapid climate change like that is that the agricultural systems will not be able to adapt in time, particularly in the poorer nations. So you will have epic crop failures in which billions of people starve. To me, that's the biggest risk. That's the biggest risk of global warming and then what they call climate change. So yeah, so basically dealing a heavy blow to the world's agricultural systems because of the severe climate changes, which basically we have epic crop failures, which means that billions of people starve, particularly in the poor nations. And what that could lead to, again, I don't think any of us want to see that show, or particularly live in that show. So yeah, I might get lucky and die before that happens. Although trying to help the fifth epic arrive before I pass on, we'll see. In Brian's last years, he actually was looking for a research assistant to crunch the numbers on conventional alternatives. And again, I said I've never seen a real definitive treatment on the issue, but again, because of Noam Chomsky writing about the new Green Deal, et cetera, and how easily it could solve the problems, I did a dive in the last couple of weeks. I did a dive. Again, I do them periodically, and this was my latest dive into some of those numbers, and I'm going to present a lot of that in this post and what it means. So, and again, I saw, so not only have, some experts say that we have, I've seen 100 and 1,000 times more available energy that we could capture with solar panels and windmills than humanity would need. So there's those kind of arguments that there's so much, that we could do. And then MIT did a study on the materials for it. But it was the number like 700, I don't know, 700 million tons or some huge number of copper that's been mined in world history to this time. And MIT said we'd have to mine as much again as has been mined in the history of Earth in the next generation to be able to, do the new Green Deal globally and electrify the whole world. So big numbers. And again, you're talking the mining was, and again, some of the experts would said, "Yeah, we have to caution you that we're probably going to tear the hell out of Earth mining like crazy." So yeah, that's an issue of mining Earth to do that. And the pros and cons today are the same pros and cons that Brian discussed again so long ago. Intermittent, so solar and wind only work when the wind's blowing and the sun's shining. So when it's not, there's a problem. There was in fact, I just this last summer in Europe, in like the summertime, renewable. So windmills and solar panels provide actually solar. So solar photovoltaic provided more electricity than any other source in Europe. And that's in summer though. So it's like it provides, it's great. It's the most. Again, this year that's significant. It's the most in the middle of summertime, but 6 months later it's providing almost none. So again, very intermittent. Wind's the same way. So it's a thing that's very intermittent. And these numbers that have been pushed around, as I'll get to, there's big problems to overcome. Big problems to overcome. And I'm not saying they can't be overcome, but for a tiny fraction of that effort, we could have free energy instead and eliminate the need for hedgehogging the world with windmills and paving over the earth with solar panels. So anyway, and that's coming. Fossil fuels. So I'm gonna, and again, it's the thing where, to their credit, all these alternative energy people and advocates are saying, we can't, fossil fuels, they're bad news. We can't keep powering the world with fossil fuels for more than one reason. But one is that we're running out of them. Oil will be almost gone in this century at current trajectories. Coal, even peak coal, peak gas. So all the fossil fuels are on a decline. They're sort of peak. Actually, conventional oil peaked 20 years ago. And then we keep fracking and doing other things, which are sucking at the dregs of Earth's hydrocarbon deposits. And the other is obviously the carbon dioxide, which is increasing the carbon dioxide content of the atmosphere, that's where global warming is coming from, or they call it climate change. In fact, global warming causes climate change. So people prefer to say it in terms of climate change. I use global warming because that's really what's driving climate change is global warming. And so those are in fact, all the race to the catastrophes. And well, we also have nuclear war with less oil. In fact, as I was writing this essay, the United States invaded Venezuela, which has the world's largest oil reserves, and kidnapped the president and his wife, and they're sitting in a jail in New York City right now. And then, in fact, I put a list. So the Substack post, I put a list of the 10 nations with the largest oil reserves. And I'll preface this though with some of the ones on this list. It's not conventional oil, which they actually have in such great amounts. In fact, Venezuela has what's called heavy oil, but the United States has been refining it for a long time. So but it definitely is not it's not the sweet stuff that's in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, and all those Gulf states. They have better oil, let's say, easier to refine, easier to extract than Venezuela. But Venezuela has the most oil reserves in the world at over 300 billion barrels. And that explains everything about what's happening in Venezuela today. Yeah, Trump can talk about drugs and trafficking and stuff. In fact, Trump is actually honest enough to be all he's been saying since we kidnapped the president of Venezuela is oil, 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 oil. That's all in fact, Wall Street's giving a big hurrah today over all the oil now that's going to be coming our way. Yeah, so it's kind of refreshing to see this kind of candor, like, yeah, we're gonna get our hands on all this oil now. So, and second place is Saudi Arabia. And there's a few, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and United Arab Emirates, which are on the top 10 reserve list, they've always played ball with the United States. And because of that, we haven't overthrown their governments and invaded them, etc. Like Saudi Arabia, they murdered a Washington Post journalist and dismembered him. And it hasn't dimmed Saudi Arabia's star in the United States, And then Yemen, it's been, engaging in a genocidal war against one of the world's poorest nations in recent years with American weapons. And so, yeah, it doesn't matter if you commit genocide or whatever, as long as you let us get your hands on the oil. Otherwise, there's hell to pay. And number 3 on the list is Iran at a mere 200 billion barrels. Yeah, Saudi Arabia is 267. I think this is as of last year, this is 2024. And Iran, we overthrew their government in 1953 because they were nationalizing the oil. And Iran had the poor taste to want to use that oil for their benefit rather than British Petroleum. And so the CIA, in fact, the weakened and disintegrating British Empire came to the United States for help, and we overthrew their government. But the deal was that the United States now would have half of Iran's oil. And under Iran, it had the worst human rights record on earth under the Shah after we overthrew their government. And of course, once the Shah was overthrown in 1979, Iran's been on our hit list ever since. In fact, Trump bombed them here last year, right? And it's threatening more as I say these words. He's been threatening more on that. Canada is number 4 at 163 billion barrels, and Canada, most of that though is what's called tar sands, which is also, it's not the good stuff that you have in the Middle East. It's tar. It's mixed with sand. And so and again, it's not the good stuff. And as I'll get to pretty soon, Venezuela, Canada, they don't, it's much harder to get the oil out. And so it reduces the return on investment and getting the oil out of these nations. Number 5 is Iraq at 145 billion barrels, which Iraq's been largely unexplored. Now maybe it's getting more explored, but there may be more in Iraq. But of course, the United States is engaged in a genocide, generation-long genocide in Iraq from 1991 to maybe about 2008, 2009, when it was we inflicted a genocide. In fact, as Chomsky has said, it was the greatest crime of the century so far was our invasion of Iraq in 2003. And so, and yeah, a decade later, when I was updating my American Empire essay, I looked into what all the pundits were saying about the invasion of Iraq, and I didn't see one pundit mention oil as a reason for why we invaded. And this is typical. Pundits, like, you never seem to see it. And that's why all this three cheers for Venezuelan oil today is kind of refreshing in the candor. Because usually the pundits just can't imagine that oil would motivate us at all. Yeah, that's part of their propaganda role. And then the United Arab Emirates is 113. That's where Dubai is, et cetera. So again, they've always played ball with the United States. And so Kuwait's next at 101 billion barrels. And again, we rescued them from Iraq. So again, the Gulf nations that played ball, yeah, life's kind of good, right? Even though it's pretty. You want to live in Saudi Arabia, probably, or Kuwait, but they have a lot of oil. Russia is number 8, so at 80 billion barrels, and the United States has been engaging in a proxy war against Russia, for the last few years there in Ukraine. But we've been, the Cold War began with the Russian Revolution, really, in 1917. And Ed Herman's last article that he published in his lifetime, the last articles he published were about this, how Russia, again, they have all those resources that we can't get our hands on. So that's the reason for the hostility. And so it's ongoing with Russia. We'll see how that plays out. Yeah, at this point, to Trump's credit, he's definitely not egging Russia toward nuclear war like Biden was. So maybe we'll avoid nuclear war with Russia, I hope. And then the United States comes in at number 9 at 55 billion barrels. And the United States actually is the biggest producer of oil in the world today, but it's because of all the fracking, the dregs. So we're really good at sucking the dregs out. But that's not going to last too long. And so the United States, and the 55 billion is, I imagine it's conventional. No, maybe it's not. So maybe there is fracking oil in that, which is, it's not the good, easy stuff that you have in Saudi Arabia. And number 10 is Libya at 48 billion barrels. And we destroyed Libya back in 2011. It's a wrecked country today. It used to have the highest standard of living in Africa with socialists. Yeah, life was, in Africa, it was, again, the highest standard of living in Africa. Not anymore, but it used to be. So when you run down the top, 10 nations, you see that it drives American foreign policy to a huge degree. In fact, Venezuela, one of the chief outcomes, which you're not seeing much discussed yet, but China was trying to get a hold of that. They're the ones who are trying to work with Venezuela, et cetera. And that venue is, I think it's safe to say, it's probably gone. So China's not going to be able to get much Venezuelan oil as it used to. In fact, it's be getting they call it shadow reserves or something. Anyway, they've been getting quote illegal shipments from Venezuela for years. Well, that's going to come to a halt. So anyway, so oil has always driven American foreign policy for a century, and that's not going to stop as long as oil is the black gold of the world economy. As Bucky Fuller said, a barrel of oil, if it was priced at the benefit that humanity got from it, it cost $1 million a barrel. And in my book preview essay last year, I calculated that. And I calculated something roughly, you can roughly calculate that. And I get it, because 1 barrel of oil produces 10 man years of work. So $100,000 a year, that's expensive for labor, but $100,000 a year, that's the million. So, okay, I get that, Bucky. And so, so the people advocating alternative energy, at least they're admitting that, unlike Trump, let's say, that the stuff's going to run out. We're having wars over oil, and so let's get to something else. And on that score, I give them a thumbs up. They understand that, except they're very limited because they don't understand the technologies that are being suppressed today and have been for generations that would totally eliminate the need for any of this. There would be no energy industry if free energy technology was allowed to become publicly used. And I'll get to that. That's one of my big themes, right? So I won't talk about it too much in this post. But one of the concepts of understanding this whole issue is called energy return on energy invested. In fact, EROI is the acronym for it, and it was invented a long time ago. In fact, the guys who invented it published this book. And so anyway, and it's again, their point, like a lot of the books I have, is that the real economy runs on energy. It doesn't run on money. Money is just an accounting fiction, really. And so, but EROI is a concept which it says really, again, the real economy. So you invest energy and effort into getting energy, and how much do you get back? And this goes back to chimps. It's a thing where hunter-gatherers, foragers, I think they get more than 10 to 1. So basically, they burn 1 calorie foraging and they get 10 calories of food back out. And so it's actually I could be wrong about that number, but it's something like that. So it's a number like that. In fact, understanding the megafauna extinctions, EROI is a good way to understand that, where when hunter-gatherers took down an elephant, EROI was like 1,000 to 1. So yeah, it was again. That's why meat was so prized. It was big megafauna. That's why humanity killed them all off, because it was this huge windfall of energy and nutrients. And that's why meat was always so prized. Even with chimps, meat's a prized food with chimps, and it always has been in the human journey because it's such a source of nutrients. And so EROI is a concept that it goes back to chimps. Again, how much energy are you spending versus how much are you collecting from the world? A century ago in East Texas, the EROI for drilling oil was 100, which meant for every 1 barrel of oil that you use, equivalent energy you use to drill oil, you get 100 barrels out. And that's because there's all this good stuff. All the sweet stuff has never been mined before, right? So all these wonderful oil fields were close to the surface, easy to drill, easy to mine, and the EROI was 100 to 1. That was the golden age of the oil business, and so that EROI of 100 has been steadily declining over the past century. In fact, today globally, I think it's less than 20. And again, in my this post, the companies, this video, they're showing that not only has it been plummeting, but they think it's going to dip below 7 before long. And the guys who came up with the EROI concept, which has been very useful again, a lot of scientists have taken that ball and run with it, with the EROI concept. And in fact, those guys, they thought an EROI of 10 was the minimum level for a sustainable modern industrial civilization. Others lowered it down to 7. They thought 7 was the threshold. So a modern society, an industrial civilization, would have to have an EROI of over 7 to be sustainable. So those are the numbers. And so anyway, so oil is predicted to dip below 7 before long. So it's sort of like as we're scraping the dregs out of Earth's hydrocarbon deposits, it's getting to the point where it won't be viable it will not be economically viable for the world to keep doing this. And that's putting aside global warming and other and wars, etc. So anyway, yeah. So fossil fuels are the fossil fuel era is a short-lived one. It's not very old, and it's gonna end before long. Like it should largely end in this century, probably end this century, one way or another. It'll probably end in this century. And these studies, again, I read a bunch of studies, and again, I've looked at this on and off for many years. And there was a study, a 2013 study. And so I should back up a second. So windmills and solar, I see stuff like windmills or EROI of 20 to 1. I've seen 30 to 1, numbers like that. Solar panels, usually less, 10 or whatever. The problem is they're intermittent. And so again, when the sun's not out, solar doesn't work. When the wind's not blowing, windmill doesn't work. And a 2013 study. So it comes down to how can the world sustain? How can a global civilization make it off of solar and windmills because of their intermittent nature? And this becomes the answer becomes, well, if we have a great global grid, it's always the sun's always shining somewhere on Earth. And so if we had a big global grid, it could move the energy around to where it's needed when, again, the windmills and the solar panels cannot produce enough. The other parts of the planet can do that. So the grand plan for these people is this global, and they advocate this global electric grid that the whole world is a part of. And then it's all getting fed in, so it can all kind of balance out. Whatever part of the world is not producing energy that day, while other parts of the world can make up for it. That's the goal. And again, that's a monumental effort to create a global electric grid to do that. But that's the answer they're coming up with. And the problem is there's also talk about storing in batteries is another one. So you store in batteries or again a global grid, these kind of solutions. But those also that's investment. So there's all this investment you'd have to make in that. And back to the EROI concept, a 2013 study concluded that when you factor in those costs of overcoming the intermittent nature of windmills and solar, it takes those ERI. So the wind EROI in this study was 16, but after you account for all the, in fact, buffering, which is again accounted for the intermittent nature, it drops down to 3.9. And solar photovoltaic, and this was Germany, it was only 3.9 unbuffered, and then buffered is only 1.6. And so what this study concluded is that again, solar and wind are not viable economically. They will not be able to power the world. I'm sure plenty of other studies have said, well, no, we can, that's not right, and we can improve things, etc. And I'll allow that. And it's like, okay, yeah, so maybe it can, but the 2013 study, which has been cited quite a bit, says they're not going to do it, which is actually also agrees with Brian's too little, too late, none of the above perspectives on these conventional alternatives. And so, yeah, so in that study, in fact, there's also solar energy where you put big mirrors out in the desert and you concentrate it on a place that gets really hot and it drives turbines. And it's called CSP. I can't remember what it stands for now, but anyway, that one is the buffered EROI is 9, so it's barely there. The other ones, coal and hydro and nuclear and stuff, they're viable, except coal's running out. Nuclear, yeah, most of these alternative energy advocates, they say we don't want nuclear, so they're trying to do it with windmill and solar, which I get and I understand and I support that. Nuclear fission. Yeah, I don't think so. Nuclear fusion? Yeah, nuclear fusion sounds good, but that's the technical feat of the century. In my opinion, in fact, Dick Russell recently did I put this on pause for just a second. Getting back. So, starting, so Dick Russell did an article on an MIT fusion scientist who was murdered by that gunman who shot up Brown University and apparently went to school with that murdered scientist. Anyway, Dick's wondering if this has international intrigue related to it. Could be. Uh, hot fusion. I regard hot fusion as a plan B for the global elite. Instead of rolling out free energy, they could, because, so what Sparky Sweet had, you know, the device looks something like this, and it could probably be made for $100 or something. But you can sell a hot fusion at $1 billion a pop once Lockheed was looking at that a few years ago, predicting something like this fit on the back of a semi flatbed. And so, sell for $1 billion a pop, you can still save capitalism and save the environment. Again, there's so many of these so-called solutions which are super expensive. I mean, it's super, again, so much effort, so much expense when I know that none of it needs to happen. So I'm going to back to where I was with EROI. In fact, where was I with that thing with Dick? Let me think here. Back to my Substack post. Again, there's all these experts who say that solar and wind can do it, like way more than do it. Save humanity's bacon. One of the experts I saw cited, he was discussing how heat pumps would be a huge help. True, but the best heat pump's been wiped out in North America. I mean, maybe it could be, that was what Dennis was doing. Maybe it could be resurrected. One of the things I want to comment on is the people who are promoting windmills and solar, photovoltaic solar. I just see so many presentations I consider misleading. As you see these power, most of the power of the world is going to be, it's wind and solar soon. And that's not true. It's just electricity. So electricity is maybe a third of global energy consumption. And it's so, and in my Substack, I present a couple of these graphs. And so, yeah, if you just look at renewable energy generation, or whatever, and how much wind and solar, provided, it's pretty big. But if you look at it compared to all energy consumption in the world, it's really small. I say it's like 6% now. And so I just see a lot of presentations I think are pretty misleading on that. So in the end, is conventional alternatives, are they too little and too late? And my take is maybe not. Maybe they're not too little and too, maybe they could, but it would be an unprecedented human effort to do that. I mean, the whole world would be devoted to doing that, to building out a renewable energy system based on, again, wind and solar. It could be done. Be my guess. Again, there's skeptics to that, definitely. And again, you're the thing of the whole world will have to pitch in and do this when you have so many interests that are going to bring the last barrel of oil out of the ground if they want to go to the next one. And I said the global elite, they are definitely meddling in things. They're not meddling too much. Again, they just make sure that free energy tech doesn't get loose, and the rest of it kind of takes care of itself. And so you have this battle between oil companies, again, all these battles over, the current fossil fuels and then the windmills and solar. And, to me, it's kind of like a fake battle. I mean, really, because I know that none of that deserves to be even discussed because, again, they're all incredibly primitive compared to the stuff I'm aware of that's on the planet today. So it's possible to do it. So I'm just going to say that people who are advocating, I'm going to say, okay, I'll allow that it could be done. at awesome effort, awesome humanities effort. And again, I'll get into this here now. And again, what I'm going to do is compare a world that's powered by windmills and solar panels versus is powered by zero point energy. And I'll show the differences. There are big differences. And even if it is done, even if solar windmill does that, I mean, for instance, jet fuel is 50 times as energy dense as electric batteries. And so airplanes, so there's electric planes, but they only have a range of a few hundred miles. And there won't be any intercontinental plane flights for a while, if ever. Electric cars save about a third of the energy over gasoline cars. Okay, something. I mean, it's something. It's again, this is not dramatic, but okay, a little better. But again, it comes down to there'll be this massive. In order to do that, there has to be this massive scaling up, not only electric grids, but again, electric generation to make electric cars viable. So just looking at the car itself is really myopic. I mean, there's so much that has to support that doesn't exist today. So yeah, it's a big issue. And again, the proponents, I've just seen so many what I consider deceptive presentations, where they just sort of ignore these areas and to promote it. That's what I'm saying. The definitive analyses of these issues that takes everything into consideration. I've never seen it. Again, just the wars and the political costs, the environment, and there's so many issues that go into it, and various presentations seize on one aspect or something, and again, I think a lot of it's very misleading, including ignoring the answer that makes it all go away. Yeah, so the new Green Deal goes global. Let's 100 trillion, maybe 200 trillion, some awesome astronomical number like that it would take to do that. So let's put a number on $200 trillion to do that for 1 billion, which is less than 100,000th of what would be spent on some new Green Deal. We'd have free energy tech. It's been done. It's on the planet. It's older than I am. And to make it from scratch wouldn't be that difficult. But you can't do it in a garage. Again, I'm going to say $1 billion. Give me $1 billion, I'll give you the fifth epic. And what it is again, even all these alternatives, windmills and solar, and 1,000 times as much as we need, et cetera. Even if that all could happen, and let's just say it could, it's still far short of what I call the fifth epic. And that's what I'm going to get into. I'm going to get into the differences between a world based on windmills and solar panels versus a world based on free energy tech, which will include anti-gravity. Again, there's all sorts of neat toys that the global elite got in their enclaves. And we don't get any right now because we're collectively asleep. One of the things that, again, back to deceptive presentations, there's one thing I've been seeing for years is this net zero, right? And net zero 2040, et cetera. And it's very elitist and really deceptive. In fact, there's been a lot of activists around the world, particularly from the non-industrialized nations, is saying this is fraudulent. Net zero for us, but not for you guys. Yeah, and Bill Gates still flies around on planes and says, "Oh, I've got these other offsets that make it okay." And it's like, yeah, the elites are gonna still fly on their planes and stuff, while the rest of us don't. This is the net zero plan that's being promoted. Yeah, it's another. The promotions, the solutions promoted by the elites are for elite benefit. It's not for the rest of us. This is I see this over and over and over again. And in fact, the net zero has been called carbon colonialism. And so, yeah, a lot of people regard it as fraudulent, and I won't argue against that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to contrast the conventional alternative energy with free energy and how each will address the greatest issues that humanity faces as I see them. And I'm going to list them and then I'll discuss them. So the big ones I see are inequality, warfare, our heavy ecological footprint, how our diets are of cheap calories have poor nutritional value lead to degenerative diseases, which is what kills most Westerners. And then there's elite suppression of technological advances and other elite racketeering and elite brainwashing of the masses, and the addictions that result from a world is based on scarcity and fear. And so I'm going to discuss all of these in turn. Inequality, I'm going to start with that. So we have rich nations and poor nations, industrialized nations and agrarian nations. And we have political and economic dictatorships, economic classes. We have poverty-induced crime. All of these dramatic inequalities have been around since the first civilizations. And in fact, that's, many of our greatest blessings and evils came from civilization. And definitely one of the greatest blights was inequality. And he basically had these elites and professionals to be riding on the backs of all these peasants and slaves who were raising all the food. And so this is still kind of with us. This kind of inequality is still here. And so will the windmills and solar panels eliminate that? Well, we'll get to that. That's a question mark. And the first civilizations, they'll conquer each other. Rising, falling empires characterize all agrarian civilizations. Europe's conquest of the world was no better. It was like we're like Mongols in boats as we conquer the world. Brutal enforcement of inequality. And industrialized nations really haven't been that much better. The United States, again, we just invaded Venezuela over the weekend. And as I mentioned earlier, it's at least Trump's saying it's about the oil. And in the wake of that, Sam Husseini reproduced the list of American interventions since World War II as chronicled by William Bloom. And he was probably the best of the people chronicling American imperial behavior since World War II in particular. The only way out of inequality that I can think of even is abundance. If we live in economic abundance, there won't be inequality any longer. There won't be any. It won't make sense. People trying to grab their bigger share of the pie, etc. When the pie's a million times as big, whatever. Nobody's going to be fighting over their slice. And inequality, again, back to the end of elites, back to inequality. Yeah, the fifth epoch, well, that's the end of that. So it's the end of that whole phase of the human journey. Scarcity's over. In fact, they call them post-scarcity societies today. So it's not a totally alien concept, but post-scarcity powered by free energy tech. Yeah, there's only I'm one of the only people on the planet actually who's advocating that. Can windmills and solar produce true abundance? That's a big question. I have my doubts. All the plans I've seen for a world economy based on conventional and alternative energy, they're all scarcity based. Again, like net zero, carbon colonialism. The peak oilers, they're for austerity. Again, depopulating the planet because our energy systems can only, and if we didn't have fossil fuels, Earth could only support less than 1 billion people. This kind of thing. So I really haven't seen any of those people advocate real abundance. So all these people are advocating some kind of scarcity, let's ride bikes, kind of answer, which is nobody's gonna be lining up for that. Yeah, net zero, it's all global austerity when you get down to it. As our GATT said, all violence is rooted in scarcity. So if you have inequality and people living in poverty, there's going to be violence and probably worse, and so abundance is the only way to end all that. And again, going back to the bonobo experience, they live in relative abundance, the most peaceful of the African great apes. And there's a lesson there for humanity. again, it would sure be nice if conventional alternatives could deliver abundance and equality, which would end elites, all social classes. Could it do it? I think it'd be a real stretch. Again, an awesome amount of effort compared to the minimal effort globally to produce free energy for the world. So anyway, could it do it? Maybe. It would definitely happen with the advent of free energy tech that was publicly used. So the next one is warfare over resources. Again, it rises same inequality issues. And so if some people have access to resources and others don't, it's going to lead to conflict. Bucky Fuller, he said, making resources available, abundant, available to all humanity is really the only solution. And politics won't be able to do that. And Fuller was, and when I read that, so many years ago, when I read that by Fuller, it was like, I got it. Yeah, it's stuff that I'd always kind of known it, but he articulated in a way that made complete sense to me. Yeah, the retail politics. Yeah, because all politics is based on slicing up the loaf of scarcity, and and again, the global elite have ensured that retail politics is going nowhere. And so, and part of me, this whole thing of, again, like if hot fusion being a plan B, windmills and solar panels is another maybe plan B to go that way. And again, in the end, though, it's about making sure there's a controlled, compliant humanity. Yeah, it's another kind of shackle, very likely. Very likely that's kind of how the powers that be look at all that. So, yeah, so all wars, pretty much all wars in world history are at the root, they were resource wars. And it's always been that way. And so, again, the ultimate issue is almost always resources, energy resources in particular. But, they dress them up as ethnic conflicts or whatever, and those are always proximate. But yeah, in the end, if everybody was living in true abundance, you wouldn't do that. Again, my neighborhood, in fact, I just walked through the Microsoft campus with my wife, and, in a world of where everybody's affluent, nobody's trying to take it from somebody else. You don't, yeah, in my community, violence and crime between the members is unknown. Yeah, it doesn't happen. So anyway, could windmills and photovoltaics make resources abundant for all humanity? A stretch, and I'll get to that more a little later, but yeah, kind of a stretch. Again, maybe adequate, maybe. Again, can those avoid austerity and scarcity with the windmill and solar panel solution? It's doubtful. Maybe, but I have my doubts about it. The next one is humanity's heavy ecological footprint. And we've had an ecological footprint, a heavier one, for over 3 million years now, ever since the first rock-wielding apes started driving big giant tortoises to extinction. And, driving all the megafauna to extinction, driving all the other human species to extinction. All the mining that takes place on Earth. I mean, it's environmentally devastating, all that. Yeah, have you ever been around mines? I've been around mines, old mines, and yeah, mines are ecologically devastating. Farms, and again, I wrote about it here a couple months ago, I think, on where humanity is there's various measures of economic or ecological stress that humanity is inflicting on the planet. And two of the biggest ones actually is phosphorus and nitrogen pollution from farming. Yeah, so our farming methods are just terrible on the planet, very, very terrible. And again, with free energy, again, again, back to energy, intelligence, and technology. I'm a AI robotics. Yeah, so AI robotic indoor farms could feed humanity many times over with fresh fruits and vegetables, which is our ideal diet. Yeah, with free energy, anti-gravity, all that stuff. Yeah, we could feed humanity a million times over with the best food. That could be done. Could you do it with windmills and solar panels? Again, back to if you put a bunch more up, maybe. And this is where the windmills. And so I've seen the numbers. They're going, they're like, well, we can put up 5 million windmills, and it's gonna solve so many of our problems. And but to get the fifth epic stuff, it's like it's 100 million windmills or some crazy number like that. And so we basically turn Earth into like a big hedgehog, with windmills everywhere and all these solar panel arrays to do this. And if you did that, could they power indoor farms, et cetera, and reduce the ecological footprint? Maybe. Again, these are all, to me, these are all really poor second alternatives to free energy tech. But could they be done? Maybe. Could it reduce the ecological footprint? Maybe. To some degree, maybe it could. But again, it would be more windmills and more solar panels in order to do that. And some of the proposals I've seen is like just replace the current consumption of energy in the world. The problem is that most of the world doesn't live in an industrialized world. And so the only way that I can even support at all any of this is that the goal is to bring all of humanity up to the same standard of living. Yeah, if you're not doing that, it's not a very good solution. And so most of what I've seen is like, well, you better gear that up a few multiples to be able to do that for all of humanity, not just the industrialized nations. Yeah, so to me, if you're going to have a world in abundance, you take the American standard of living today, raise it by, an order of magnitude, 5 or 10 times, and then bring all of humanity up to that. And you would have part of the Industrial Revolution as its Industrial Revolution reaches potential, let's say. Still sort of what I call the fifth epic, but you could have a world where everybody's living a pretty good life. And the ecological footprint might be, pretty small. Maybe. Yeah, maybe. In the fifth epic, what I see is we're no longer using any living thing other than food. So we eat, and I see the world going vegetarian because we can. I think you wake up the human conscience. You can't convince people today of that, but when people start living the fifth epic, then it's like, why would I kill any animals if I don't need to? But I think that will become obvious, and people will. Again, I see it being pretty voluntary. People are like, oh, yeah, let's not kill animals any longer. And then it's like, let's not chop down trees any longer, et cetera. And so, yeah, again, I know that the global elite have exotic materials that look like something out of a magic show. And so, yeah, to me, there'd be no reason to chop a tree down, or even fibers, natural fibers and stuff. That's probably all of that would be obsolete. And so you wouldn't be doing that to life forms. Back to Edward Wilson's his half Earth idea of giving half of Earth back to nature. In the fifth epic, you give pretty much all of it back to nature. That would be the ideal. So the question would be, how much could you give back to the windmills and solar farms? Could you give half back like Wilson wanted? Maybe you could. So, but again, so you half back instead of all back. So again, all these conventional solutions, I think, are far short what I call the fifth epic. With free energy tech, you could also pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere to bring the levels down to pre-industrial levels again. If you wanted, you could make it any level you want. And so could you also do that with windmills and solar? I suppose you could. Again, but that means making more windmills and solar panels to do that. And so all of these things that are trying to catch up with the fifth leg of it means the whole world's going to be one big windmill farm. So, and it could do that. But I know it's unnecessary. That for me, it's like, okay, I suppose you maybe could do that, But I'm just like, what a waste of everybody's effort to do something like that. Yeah, how about just a little sentience and integrity and make free energy happen instead? That's my answer. Uh, so cities, and I've mentioned this before and talking about the epics. So cities are energy concentrating devices. All cities have these hinterlands which provide the food, etc. And actually, cities, the people who live in cities, they consume less energy per capita than if they live in the countryside. That's one of the reasons cities exist. It's an energy solution. And so I've seen the polls. Most people would rather live in pastoral environments with urban amenities. The fifth epic, people would have that. And so, and the question is, could solar and windmills do that? Could we actually eliminate cities and everybody lives in, pastoral environments? Doubtful. I kind of doubt. Again, back to it, take more energy, a lot more energy to make that happen. So again, I don't know. Again, I don't know how much the world you know, I don't know how many millions of windmills you would take to, make something that approaches the fifth epic, but it'd be a heck of a lot. And again, solar, same thing. So, back to like batteries, etc. I could see transportation networks becoming not battery, but the transportation networks actually there's electric grids that run alongside them, so all the transportation is run off of the electric grid. So there's no batteries for stuff that's running on the grid. I mean, I don't know if people promoted that or not, but I see that as something, so it's all electric cars, electric trains that everybody travels in, and they're being fed by the grid, so there's not really a battery operated. Again, if you had a global grid, I suppose that would work. Uh, Again, batteries though, yeah. So all these batteries is another. Again, you're mining. These are all called suboptimal solutions compared to what I know exists. But could it happen? I suppose it would. Again, could you have a world where we weren't polluting, we weren't destroying the environment, we weren't having wars? Could you do that all with the windmills and solar panels? And it's like maybe you could pull that off. But once you got there, again, I know the stuff that exists. So maybe you got to that level and then at least it went away, maybe. And if that happens, then the suppression would, and again, then you'd have free energy tech, and then you'd end up getting rid of all that stuff. So in one of the scenarios is they do all this windmills and everything else. We get to this, and then they at least maybe go away or not as influential, and the exotic tech comes out from under wraps, and then we all have free energy, and then we're going to go and dismantle all that. All those windmills we set them up, and then a generation later you're taking them down, and just again, to me it's like it's like digging a hole and filling it up again. It's like, do we really need to do that? Yeah, again, is it doable? I suppose. But again, it's not very visionary. And that's my thing is windmills and solar panels is in no way visionary compared to what I know exists. So anyway, so the ecological footprint, could we reduce it by a lot? Maybe, but nowhere near as much as you could if you had free energy and anti-gravity tech and the exotic materials tech, etc. The next category is cheap calories. So, humans, when humans left the trees, when apes left the trees, humanity, the human line began diverging from its ancestral diet of mainly fruit. Yeah, so chimp and gorilla diets are mostly fruit. And so that's really what we work best off of is fruit still. And so, but anyway, they when they left it, there was now more meat. And then when all meat was gone, they started the agricultural revolution. Then it became seed crops, wheat, maize, rice. And it's not our ideal diet. And then what happened is that though they're all in they had seasonal environments. So we had seasonal environments for growing seasons and harvest seasons, and then you had to, try to make the food last to the next harvest. And so now it became food preservation. You're grinding stuff into flour, all this kind of stuff, and it wrecked the nutritional quality of those foods. Yeah, so again, back in the good old European days, in the middle of winter, they're eating terrible stuff to get to the winter, which is when so many would die. And so it's a thing where all these keep calories. So today, a calorie of you get some cheese puffs or whatever processed food, and then you actually go to the produce section and you're getting fruit and vegetables. The produce section calories are 5 times as expensive as the processed food calories in our industrial systems. And so these are cheap calories. And that's why the poor eat processed food, the cheap food, which gives them all these health issues. And so the poor are also unhealthy because they're eating really poor nutritional quality food, because the good stuff is more expensive and they can't afford it. So they're eating junk food. And so back to the indoor farms, et cetera, if you now had, ability to have all of humanity have year-round fresh food, you would eliminate all of our degenerative diseases, because they all come from that. Back to metabolic disease, et cetera, which I've written about a bit over the years. Processed food's a killer. And so back to indoor farms, et cetera. So could windmills and solar panels do indoor farms and have all people have access to fresh food all the time? Maybe you could do it. I mean, easy with free energy tech, et cetera, and anti-gravity. And could it be done with windmills and solar panels? Maybe. But back to the footprint, it's the same kind of thing. So indoor farms would be doing it. And indoor farms are the ones that can grow year round. You can't do it in seasonal environments. You can't have year round farming in seasonal environments. So indoor farms solve that. And could windmills and solar panels power indoor farms that could feed all of humanity? I suppose. Again, I haven't seen the numbers on that, but maybe. But again, back to that'd be more windmills and more solar panels would do that. The elite meddling part. So suppression of technological advances, and then the brainwashing of the public on behalf of the elite, which is Ed Herman's propaganda model is all about. It brainwashes the public on behalf of elite interests. That's what our mainstream media in the West does that. And so, how to say it? As long as you have elites, you got, again, in abundance, you won't have elites. Elites will go away. And they understand, the people who run the world get this. If you had abundance, you wouldn't have elites any longer. Elites are basically a product of inequality and scarcity. And so, it's only a social world that only makes sense in a world of scarcity, just like slavery. Slavery you couldn't do slavery with hunter-gatherers, and industrial, it didn't make sense either. Really, I mean, it's industrial revolution devalued human labor, and so only in agrarian civilizations did slavery really make sense. And elites really only make sense in agrarian and industrial civilizations. In a fifth epoch civilization, elites they will become obsolete, like slavery became obsolete. And so, could you reach abundance that would eliminate elites with windmills and solar panels? Maybe. What we've seen so far doesn't look close to that, but I'll give them the benefit of the doubt that maybe you could get to there one day. But elites are calling the tune, though. They're calling the shots today, so in ways that most people are oblivious to. So turning the Earth into a hedgehog of windmills and then dismantle them soon thereafter. Can we skip the hedgehog stage? That's my question. And my last category here is addictive behaviors. And so addictions. So all addictions, in my opinion. I think the science agrees with this. It's like all addictive behaviors are a brief attempt to escape from misery. It feels good, so you're doing something that feels good and you get this addictive and you get this response. And then what happens is you end up ruining yourself trying to keep getting this high, whether it's winning at gambling or it's some, alcohol or drug or whatever these behaviors are that are addictive. And my so-called visionary writings of the fifth epoch, etc., I can see let's say the fifth epoch arrives, in 2040. Let's say it does. I can see the next 10 years of all the wonderful things that will happen in transitioning to the fifth epoch. One of the ones I see happening is a global effort to end addictions. So everybody who's addicted, it'll be an effort to end those addictions, and not in a, it's not going to be draconian and prisons, all this kind of stuff, but it's going to be giving people what they need to break their addictions. So I think that'll be a high priority, and I think it can work in the fifth epoch. Back again, can it be abundant enough in a world of windmills and solar panels to get to where they can also, we can eliminate addictions under that energetic framework? Maybe. My answer is maybe. Fifth epoch, for sure. Under windmills and solar, maybe. So and in the summary of this, for windmills and solar panels, and the biggest issues that humanity faces, most of these are a maybe. Maybe with enough effort, maybe with literally half of humanity voting itself to a windmill and solar panel effort, maybe you could get there, maybe. But with what I know exists as being suppressed by the global elite, which is stuff's older than I am, and it's just, to me, it's just this huge waste of effort to do that. Which again is going to be still a question mark whether it really get there, and it won't get to the fifth epoch, but it might get to where the fourth epoch looks a lot fairer, a lot cleaner. So that I'm going to say maybe it could get there with enough effort, with enough sweat, enough tears. You could get there, and maybe to eliminate war and poverty and all those. Maybe big maybe with free energy, etc. Certainty. But with the traditional alternative, the big maybe. And back to Brian, none of the above is too little and too late. So yeah, Brian's argument of too little, too late, I think is still relevant. And so, yeah, we shall see. And so definitely what I won't be doing is promoting windmills and solar panels as the answer, because I know that there's stuff that's vastly superior to those to deliver what I call the fifth epoch. Yeah, so the fifth epoch transition, I think it can happen in a generation. In fact, Stephen Greer says a generation. If all the tech came out, so the generation is if we actually develop free energy tech 1.0 from scratch, then it may take a generation. But if the stuff that exists today was given to the world tomorrow, I think it would take 5 years or something to transition to the fifth epoch. It wouldn't take very long. Yeah. So for me, the new Green Deal and hedgehogging the world with windmills and carpeting it with solar panels for 0.001% of that effort, we could have the fifth epoch instead, and skip all that sweat. So that's what I vote for. So anyway, so back to back to the beginning of this, and Brian's question is can these traditional alternatives really do it? And the answer is maybe, but really at a much lower level than can be done with free energy tech, with anti-gravity tech, etc. So I get where Brian was coming from, and I don't want to, how to say it, if I can get 1% of all the solar panel and windmill advocates to come be free energy advocates, it'd be over. that'd be way more than enough to overcome humanity's inertia and the organized suppression to bring free energy to the world. So again, it takes on a global level, it takes so little effort to make the fifth epoch happen, except there's organized suppression, and almost nobody can imagine what I'm talking about, or they regard as some kind of fairy tale fantasy. And in my circles, it's no fairy tale fantasy. It's here, it's real, and it's under wraps because the global elite don't want to lose their position of sitting astride humanity. That's the game that's taking place. And so do we continue being slaves and maybe kind of get a little freer under a windmill solar panel economy? Again, I don't know what the globally have to say about that. Again, I keep seeing, depopulation, strategies, etc. So yeah, I just, how to say it, I don't trust the elites to come up with solutions that are going to really benefit from. I don't trust them. And so that's where I am. So those are the issues that I think are the important ones, the ones immediately come to mind for, again, comparing, a solar windmill world to a free energy world. And those are the big ones. And let's do free energy instead. How about that? So anyway, that's all for now. Thanks for watching.